Benj, thank you for joining us.
You're welcome, it's a pleasure to be here.
What brings you to Global Offshore Wind 2016?
The Offshore Wind Conference is a big part of my annual calendar actually. I work as country manager for Dong Energy in the UK, and this is a great place to come and find out what's happening in the industry, catch up with a whole raft of people, other developers, supply chain players, regulators and so on. So it's a really good forum for me to catch up on a lot of news, remake a lot of connections in a very efficient way.
You strive for an indigenous supply chain.
Yes.
How does that work?
So this is a young industry. We've really only been doing offshore wind in Europe for the last 15 or so, 20 years, and in the UK really only got off the ground about 10 years ago. So the supply chain is still growing fast. We know that historically we've lent on the supply chains of the onshore wind industry, but as the technologies diverge, I think there is a huge opportunity for the UK to build a strong and sustainable and internationally competitive supply chain that will take some work to develop, but over the long term will very much play a role in driving costs down for the industry as a whole.
What is the interplay between that workforce, supply chain and levelised cost?
Obviously, in the short term, then setting up new supply chains takes investment, it takes some risk, and obviously there's learning to be done. So in the short term, it's a real challenge for any industry to bring in large-scale new supply chains, but it's doable, and I think we've already seen it in the UK. We've seen the manufacturing of transition pieces, we've seen cable in the UK, we're seeing a whole range of different technologies that go into our turbines and the balance of plant, all coming from the new and invested suppliers in the UK. So I think it can be done. It can be done without impacting cost. Of course, getting cost down is an absolute imperative for our industry. We know we have to be cost competitive within the next decade or so, and I think we'll very much achieve that without prejudicing that desire to build UK supply chains alongside it.
Because of this new economy, is there a trade-off between that local supply and job creation within that region, or is that not really a factor of that kind?
Well, we already see 13,000 jobs in the offshore wind sector in the UK, and that's grown very rapidly, and there's significant headroom there to increase that. We've seen things like the Greenport Hull facility that Siemens is putting up with nearly 500 jobs. We've got several hundred jobs in the Isle of Wight, but many other smaller success stories around the UK. So I think this is a great story in terms of cost down and jobs up, and I think the two have often been played against each other, and I think that's probably not right.
As you're on the Energy Council, what about political will?
So yes, that's right. I co-chair the Offshore Wind Industry Council, and we spend a lot of time talking between industry and government around where this industry is going, and I think the fruits of that conversation you saw in Amber Rudd's reset speech in November last year, where we saw 3 technologies coming through as the cornerstone of British energy policy, and that was gas, nuclear and offshore wind. So I think we are demonstrating that we are very much part of the long-term energy system in the UK, and that dialogue with government through the Industry Council is a fundamental part of building that common understanding of what we can deliver to UK consumers.
With offshore wind providing 12% of the energy last year, where are you going to go from here?
Well, it's a fantastic statistic, isn't it? 12% of our consumption of electricity coming from offshore wind, and that's going to continue to grow. Where we get to, I think it's very hard to say. There's significant headroom before we really run into big challenges in terms of balancing the grid. Of course, it's often talked about that wind power is variable. However, it's extremely predictable, and we know from experience that both on and offshore wind, and particularly offshore wind, we can forecast production a couple of days ahead with great precision, in fact. So that enables the grid to plan very efficiently. And of course, as the percentage of power on the grid comes from variable sources, then we have to have different strategies. And we're seeing those starting to emerge. But for the time being, that's certainly not a constraint. And I think it's often quoted as a problem, but certainly it's not for the now.
What next for Dong?
For Dong, well, we've got a very exciting programme at the moment in the UK. We've got 4 wind farms in construction. We've got the Burbo Bank extension just off Liverpool, which we've started building earlier this month. In fact, we've just put the first foundations in. Very exciting project, not just for Dong, actually, for the whole industry. It's the first use commercially and the first offshore deployment of the MHI Vestas 8 megawatt turbines. That will be a great story, seeing how that's driving new technology, which will ultimately bring costs down and productivity up. So that's one. Then we're over on the East Coast building the Racebank wind farm in the Wash, back on the West Coast again building Walney Extension up in the East Irish Sea, and then later in the decade the world's biggest offshore wind farm, Hornsea 1, which will be 1.2 gigawatts, a real mega scale project for us.
Exciting times.
Very exciting. We're very busy, keeping our heads above water, but we're looking forward to the fruits of our labour and some fantastic inaugurations over the next 4 or 5 years.
So on the technology front, where are the big changes going to come?
Technology is a key area for cost reduction. We've already seen huge strides in terms of, for example, the size of turbines. We've been deploying the Siemens 3.6 and the Vestas 3 megawatt turbines in the past. Those very much are yesterday's story. We're already deploying 6 and 7 megawatts, and as I mentioned, just putting out the first 8 megawatt turbines in the world. So we think bigger turbines is a very exciting part of the technology journey, but there are many other aspects, not only in terms of the physical kit, but also how we install. And we've seen new generation of installation vessels coming into the market that are really transforming the way in which we build our wind farms, and that's driving costs down as well.
What does the future hold?
I think the future is going to be a global one. Dong Energy is very active and quite a big player in the Northwest European arena, but we're already active in the US now on the East Coast. We're looking at Taiwan and other markets. So we believe this is going to be a global business. We're very excited about our future in this sector.
Benj, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.